Welcome back to Screen View Mirror. I'm your host, Emma, and you're listening to Screen View Thoughts. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Fabrizio, a fellow film enthusiast, and we'll be talking about crime as a genre in film. Hi, Fabrizio. Hope you're doing well.
Hi, how are you? I'm doing well here.
I'm good. All right, so today we'll be talking about two directors who need no introduction. I think Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese are both equally great with this genre, but let's see how their movies compare. So for the purposes of brevity, we've agreed on 6 films, 3 per each director, and I'll read the list now. So for Coppola, we've got the Godfather Trilogy, that makes 3 films, and then for Scorsese, we have Mean Streets, Goodfellas, and The Irishman. Originally, we were going to do Casino instead of Mean Streets, but then I thought, well, Casino's basically Goodfellas without Ray Liotta, so we decided to do Mean Streets instead. And let's start our discussion by assessing some of the stylistic choices of the films and the overall stories. So, first question, what do you think makes a good story from these films, and which story do you prefer if you had to kind of put these 6 films side by side and say, well, this is the most powerful or the most interesting story?
I say The Godfather Part 1 has a great story, but I feel like overall the second one has better story since we see how Vito became the person he is, the many losses he has suffered in his life, and we see major development from Michael's character.
Exactly.
Because remember, at the beginning of the movie, we see Vito's mother and brother being killed and him having to go at the funeral of his father.
Yeah.
So you can see, as a kid, he already started off with, a dark, bad start, I could say. And also with Michael Corleone, losing his father, it was just, it's really tough. And him having to take over, especially, since he was more about the business, but you still see some major development from his character. Now, in the Scorsese field, I'd say Goodfellas wins with the story of Henry Hill and his companions in his mafia lifetime. It is very gripping from beginning to end, him showing as a kid, getting into the life of it, and then at the end, where he has kind of his downfall. Now, The Godfather is great. I loved it. But to be honest, it does get quite slow at times. I don't have the best patience, but I still loved it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, in my opinion, Goodfellas is just a full-on roller coaster. It's amazing.
I know. I think I prefer Goodfellas to The Godfather because, and I'm talking about the entire trilogy anyway, I think it's more realistic, and the pacing is perfect. It gets kind of like faster and more chaotic toward the end of the film, and even with the music choices, we see that with the editing, the takes are much shorter, and that makes Goodfellas a very sort of reflective film of the genre. But I think that, in terms of story, I agree with you. Part 2 of The Godfather is my favorite because of the story. We get the flashbacks, and it's, it's cool. I really enjoy the story. But in terms of form and style and cinematography, I'd say, the first and second one come close, but I'd say the first one wins. It's the most iconic one. So, speaking of form, what do we think about the lighting and the color and the overall cinematography of these 6 films? I think for Mean Streets, the thing that really struck me was the use of lighting and color together to kind of create this atmosphere, when they're in the bar and it's just red, it's completely red, and that kind of reflects the, I don't know if you could say urgency, but like maybe even just the blood, right, of the lifestyle. And so that was very interesting work. And just to think that Mean Streets, it had the lowest budget of the 6 films. I think it was like $500,000, and half of that budget was used on the soundtrack, which, it's Scorsese. The soundtrack is excellent. So, it's, and the color and the lighting, it was incredible so I can't say Mean Streets wins necessarily, because you've got Coppola's sort of chiaroscuro-like lighting in The Godfather, but it's definitely something that's very striking. And the use of camera work is very innovative as well. Keitel's character, when he's kind of like drunk, and they actually strapped a camera to his chest, and it kind of, so as he was walking, the camera was walking with him, and we had that very innovative sort of use of the camera. What do you think?
Oh yeah, I agree with you there. The Mean Streets, it has, for a low budget film, it has really good camera work. I love how in the bar, it's not like 100% like bright, but it has that red tone, which kind of shows like some, how would I say it? It shows it feels just, it just feels, it gives off like a weird vibe to it. I mean, usually you assert the color red with danger, and that's pretty much what was happening at the bar. The bar was not a safe place. I mean, a lot of stuff went down there. But when they would go out into the streets, I mean, because it takes place in the slums of New York, it doesn't take place in like Times Square. It takes place in like a really bad setting of New York. So when they would go out, it was kind of dark, and I really like that. Now, when it comes to Coppola, I mean, I love the lighting of The Godfather. I love the use of the low-key lighting technique in the opening scene of the movie. When Vito is first shown, when it's first shown in the movie as this kind of like dark and ominous yet powerful presence, because he is the one of like the head of the family. He oversees and he makes the decisions about everything. But when we talk about the cinematography, I'd go with The Irishman. Because it's just beautifully shot. I mean, in any location, whether it was when they were getting gas or when they kill this guy in the bar, I love the cinematography there. I mean, everything is just beautifully lit and kind of like composed to the scene, and I honestly loved it.
That's true.
Lighting,
That's
for me,
true.
is The Godfather, and the cinematography was The Irishman.
I mean, The Irishman was great, and I feel like it gave us closure in many ways, because I mean, most likely this is the last film that Scorsese did with, the gang, the guys, and
and
with
our De Niro and our Pesci.
Pesci and Pacino. And Pesci's supposed to be retired, and here he is in The Irishman, and so I think it gave the viewers and maybe even the crew and the actors and Scorsese some closure with regard to the genre and the just generally just the history of working with these guys. I mean, Scorsese and De Niro are basically friends from the 70s, right? And so I think it also kind of picks up where Goodfellas left off, right? So Goodfellas...
Also, since we see... No, go ahead, sorry.
No, it's fine. Okay. Goodfellas is kind of like the peak of that lifestyle, and you do see the downfall, but it's the ending, the sort of great train robbery kind of style ending. I mean, he's still in his 50s at that moment. But then The Irishman is you have these old guys who can barely walk, and they're reflecting back onto that life. And so it's kind of like the reverse perspective. So with Goodfellas, you're taking the story as it happens, and you're sort of the chronological effect. It's in real time in many ways. Did you see what I mean? And with The Irishman, you start off with this 80-year-old guy, and then he kind of reflects back. It's kind of like the Rose on the Titanic thing, where she starts right. So it's that, except with a bunch of mob bosses who are now eating mashed potatoes in an elderly people's home. Exactly. So that's what I think. I think the two movies work very well together, and you could even watch them as the way you watch Godfather Part 1 and 2. Just not 3, because I didn't like 3. I don't think you liked it either.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's my least favorite of the trilogy, Of the whole list, it's my least favorite.
Yeah. Mary, he's your first cousin. Well, then I love him first. I mean...
It's just... Oh my God.
It's not good. Okay, well, what about the acting and the performances? I mean, it goes without saying that the 6 films are good, for sure. But if you had to pick a performance or an actor that stood out in one of the 6 films, who would that be?
That's a really good question. I mean, when it comes to Goodfellas, Pesci was just amazing. I mean, in every scene he was in, you were like, and the same thing with De Niro. In every scene they were in, you were just like concentrated on, you were fixated on them, because I mean that's what they were going for. And Pesci was just, I mean, like I said, he's amazing in Goodfellas, especially in the scene where he's with Ray Liotta in the bar.
Yeah,
they're pretty much like
funny how he wrote that scene. He took it to Scorsese and he wrote the scene. He said, "Oh look, I have a suggestion." And I think the reason Pesci really works as a sort of mob character is because he kind of grew up around people of that circle, so he knows kind of the stylistic and the linguistic nuances of that. So it really, definitely Pesci and Goodfellas.
Yeah. But I'd say that the performance that sticks out for me I'd say it was probably Al Pacino and De Niro in The Godfather Part 2. I mean, De Niro, that was a well-deserved Oscar he got for the young Vito Corleone. And the same with Pacino. I mean, he didn't get the Oscar, but still, I mean, he was great as Michael. And going back to Goodfellas, I mean, I already told you before that I didn't really enjoy Ray Liotta. I mean, I'm not a big fan of him, but he was pretty good as De Niro. I did like him in that one. And going into Mean Streets, we saw some really good performances from a young De Niro and Keitel. For these to be like their upcoming first like kind of movie with Scorsese, I mean like Keitel's first movie with Scorsese was Who's That Knocking at My Door? But when it comes to Mean Streets, for them being like not amateurs but like really young into the game, they did a great job.
No, I agree. I'm surprised we didn't see more of them together because the chemistry was just bang on. I mean, it was just great. And you could see, like, the cool thing about Mean Streets is the story has this sort of dichotomy and this contrast between Keitel's character, who's sort of trying to not be bad. You know, he's trying to be the good guy. He's trying to help De Niro's character out. And, you know, he's praying and everything, but I feel like he's dragged into that lifestyle. But then we've got this complete, you know, terrible guy. So De Niro's character. And he, I mean, just the contrast between, Johnny Boy and what was the name of Charlie, I think. Johnny Boy and Charlie, it was just incredible. And to see like their different motivations and conflicts kind of clash together, it was, And actually, the church that's used in the one of the opening scenes of the film, it's the same church as the one in the baptism scene in Godfather Part 2. I think Part 2 or Part 3. Yeah. It's the same church in New York. It's kind of like, wow. But
the baptism murders? Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
So,
I never noticed that. Oh, wow. No, but I'd say the acting, for me, it's... For me, the best acting is in Godfather Part 2.
What about the soundtrack and the sound, the use of music? I think, well, for me, Scorsese wins on this one with Mean Streets. I mean, Goodfellas has an incredible soundtrack, but Mean Streets, I mean, it's incredible. It's great. For me, Mean Streets, the soundtrack to that was my favorite, but we cannot deny the iconic glory of the theme song for The Godfather neither, but you know, that's just one song, whereas the entirety of the soundtrack of Mean Streets, it's incredible. I feel like, I don't know, Scorsese has our grandfather's taste in music and then yet manages to make it look cool, right?
I mean, I love that type of music. I love 80s rock. I love all of that. So.
Yeah. So what do you think?
When it comes to that, I also go with Scorsese, and I love the Mean Streets soundtrack. It's just beautiful. It's amazing. But that's my favorite. And in Goodfellas, also I loved it. And Scorsese always has great music. Yeah. So in Goodfellas, I love how the music ties in perfectly with the scenes. It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's perfect. For example, the scene where we see, Jimmy Conway in the bar when he's smoking to the music of "Sunshine of Your Love." Yeah, that's for me. That's a huge. I mean, I've been uploaded it to my account. I mean, it's just a masterpiece of a scene. It's beautiful, and that's also the scene where we get the line. He was the guy who rooted for
the bad guys in the movies. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like we all sometimes kind of do root for the bad guys.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally what we're doing while watching Goodfellas and Godfather. And I mean, I don't think that the primary intent of this genre is to glorify that kind of behavior. But I think that as viewers, because we know that this is something that's not allowed, this is something that we're probably never going to really do, we're very curious to be sort of invited into that kind of life. So yeah, for sure. But I think, Goodfellas uses music better with the film and the story, whereas Mean Streets, it may not use music to the same effect, right? Because this goes back to what I was talking about with the speeding up the narrative toward the end of the film with Goodfellas. It may not use the same kind of... It may not use music to the same effect, but the soundtrack in Mean Streets is just incredible. So yeah, and then I love how The Irishman has some songs which were used in Goodfellas, and if you watch those two movies back to back, don't, because it's literally 5.5 hours. But if you do,
Yeah.
if you do, I mean, you'll see those parallels, and it's just incredible.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful.
All right, so if you had to choose one film that is your favorite from this list, which one would it be?
I mean, you already know me. It's, for me, one of my favorite films of all time is Goodfellas. It's my number 2 on my top 10 list of all time. And to be honest, that list, it always changes because I always see a movie and I'm saying, you know what, this should be number 1. You know what, no, this should be number 1. It's always changing. But the top 2 movies, and the top 3 that have never changed are Inglourious Basterds by Tarantino, Goodfellas by Scorsese, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly by Sergio Leone.
Yeah.
But right now, I saw Whiplash by Damien Chazelle, and I'm literally considering that for number 1. It was that movie just has something on me. It was amazing. But yeah, for sure. I mean, Goodfellas is my favorite one of the whole list.
Well, I'd say for me, Goodfellas as well, just because I'm most familiar with that film. But I cannot deny, the brilliance of Godfather Part 1 and 2. I mean, the attention to detail, and the foreshadowing that went into that film. I mean, there's one point where Michael phones to ask about his father, and he's with Kay, and so he's sort of standing in the phone booth, and just outside the phone booth is Kay, and so this is kind of like the foreshadowing of, well, he's going to isolate himself from everyone that's close to him in his life. He's going to be in this bubble. And that mirrors the end of that film where Kay is sort of separated by the closing door of the office. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of attention went into the stylistic choices and the details of the two films. I mean, Part 3 was, look, if you don't place it next to Part 1 and 2, it's not a bad movie. But just with that kind of precedent, it was disappointing, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, for it to become like, if you compare it, of course, yeah, you're always going to say 1 and 2, but 3, I mean, it's not a bad movie. It's just that, having to live up to the expectations to finish such a saga, when you come from 1 and 2, it was kind of hard for them to pull it off. And I also felt like, I heard there was like some production problems with the movie, so it was also kind of, when I watched it, for me, it just felt forced. It felt like, it's not, I felt like they were like, we don't want to do this movie, but we have to do it. So, I feel like if they would have like maybe put a little bit of more like heart or passion into it, it would have been way better. Yeah, I agree. That's what I think.
Yeah, and especially just resting on that backbone and history of Apocalypse Now and the first 2 films. I mean, it would have been difficult to make Part 3 better, but it certainly wasn't as good. But anyway, I think that's all we have time for today. Fabrizio, thank you so much for taking your time to participate in this discussion. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing our screen view thoughts on the greatest films out there in this genre. You can follow Fabrizio at Fabrizio_movies on Instagram, and be sure to check out all the latest SVM updates at screen_view_mirror. Thanks again for joining me, Fabrizio.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Thank you.
This was great.
Thank you. This was Screen View Thoughts.